I had always believed in the strength of our marriage. Emma and I met in college, both young, ambitious, and completely enthralled by each other. She was brilliant, charming in a way that made everyone around her feel like they were the most important person in the room. I was drawn to her like gravity, and from the moment we became a couple, I thought we were inseparable. We built a life together, navigating careers, financial struggles, and eventually, the joys and burdens of raising 2 children. I worked hard, pushing my way up the corporate ladder, while Emma pursued her passion in marketing. We had a beautiful home, 2 kids who adored us, and a marriage that, to anyone on the outside, seemed unbreakable. We weren't perfect, of course, no couple is. There were arguments, misunderstandings, and the slow erosion that comes with familiarity, but I never thought for a second that we would fall apart. Looking back, I can see the warning signs, though they were subtle enough at the time to ignore. Emma started working late more often, attending networking events that ran long into the night. She always had an explanation, a reason why she needed to stay out just a little longer, but I trusted her. I wanted to trust her. I had no reason not to. Even when our intimacy started to fade, I chalked it up to exhaustion. 2 kids, full-time jobs, the pressures of maintaining a home. It was natural for passion to take a back seat. I told myself we would find our way back, that this was just a rough patch. After all, we had been through so much together. Emma still looked at me with warmth, still spoke to me with affection. We celebrated anniversaries, went on vacations, and played the part of a loving, stable couple. It wasn't an act, at least not on my end. I adored her, respected her, and never once considered the possibility that she might be hiding something from me. But time has a way of revealing cracks, no matter how desperately you try to ignore them. There were small moments, glimpses of something just beneath the surface. A text she quickly swiped away, a sudden shift in mood after checking her phone, a lingering scent of unfamiliar cologne on her clothes. I dismissed them, convinced myself I was overthinking. I had never been the jealous type, and I wasn't about to start now. For a decade, I lived in blissful ignorance, blind to the truth that was slowly unraveling right in front of me. And then, one day, I found the video. Life continued in a steady rhythm, predictable and comfortable. Our kids grew older, moving from childhood innocence to the chaotic teenage years. Emma and I fell into our roles, her, the supportive and loving mother, me, the provider, the steady presence in our home. There was a balance to it, one that I didn't question. We hosted dinner parties, took family vacations, and celebrated milestones with friends. From the outside looking in, our marriage was enviable. I heard it often, how lucky I was to have a wife like Emma, how she was the kind of woman men dreamed of. And I agreed. She was beautiful, intelligent, and captivating. Even after years together, I still felt proud to call her my wife. But there were moments, small and fleeting, when I felt something shift between us. It wasn't dramatic, no screaming fights, no cold shoulders, but a subtle distance. The way she would pull away just slightly when I reached for her hand, or how she would turn to her phone when I tried to start a conversation. I told myself it was normal, that after years together, passion naturally faded. I worked harder at our marriage, made more of an effort. I planned surprise date nights, bought her gifts just because, tried to remind her of what we had. And she responded, at least on the surface. She smiled, kissed me, thanked me for being so thoughtful. But there was something in her eyes, something I couldn't name. I started noticing how often she was on her phone, how she would turn the screen away when I entered the room. It was a reflex, something she probably didn't even realize she was doing, but it gnawed at me. Once I saw a message flash across her screen, just a name. J. Before I could process it, she had locked the phone and tucked it away. It was nothing, I told myself. A colleague, a friend. After all, she had never given me a reason to doubt her. And yet, the feeling lingered. At night, I lay in bed beside her, listening to the soft sound of her breathing. I reached for her, but she stirred just enough to shift away, pulling the covers tighter around her body. I told myself she was just tired. We both were. Life was exhausting. I didn't know that for 10 years she had been living a life I wasn't a part of. Not yet, at least. But the truth was coming. And when it did, it would destroy everything. The years passed in a blur of routine. Work, kids, home, repeating in an endless cycle. Emma and I still functioned as a team, at least on the surface. We attended parent-teacher meetings, hosted family gatherings, and played our roles seamlessly. If anyone had asked, I would have said we were happy. Maybe not the kind of passionate, all-consuming love we had in the beginning, but a steady, dependable marriage built on years of history. But something had changed, even if I refused to acknowledge it. Emma was busier than ever. She was traveling more for work, spending late nights at the office, always rushing off to some meeting or conference. I didn't question it. I had always admired her ambition, her dedication to her career. When she came home exhausted, collapsing onto the couch instead of into my arms, I told myself she was just overwhelmed. The distance between us grew, but I justified it. Our children needed us. Life was demanding. These things happened in long marriages. Still, the unease in my gut never quite went away. It was little things at first, forgotten details, slip-ups in her stories. She once mentioned staying late at work, but a friend later told me they had seen her across town that same evening. Another time, she claimed her flight had been delayed, but when I checked online, it had landed hours earlier. I asked her about it, and she laughed it off, calling me paranoid. "You're overthinking things," she said. And maybe I was. But then there were the changes I couldn't explain away. Emma, always careful with money, started spending more. New dresses, expensive perfumes, weekend spa trips with the girls. She worked out more, got her hair done more frequently. At first, I told myself she just wanted to feel good about herself. And I wanted to support that. But when she stopped letting me touch her, when she started rejecting my advances with vague excuses, headaches, exhaustion, stress, I felt something inside me shift. I had spent years trusting her without question. I had never looked through her phone, never demanded to know where she was every second of the day. But now, I found myself watching her more closely, searching for clues in her words, in her actions. One night, while she was in the shower, I picked up her phone. My hands were shaking as I stared at the screen. It was locked, of course. But even without opening it, I could see what I had been too afraid to acknowledge: hidden messages, deleted calls, a password I didn't know. I put the phone down before she could catch me. That night I couldn't sleep. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was imagining things. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I just didn't know how bad it really was. Not yet. I don't know when it started. That's the thing that haunts me the most. There wasn't a clear moment, a definitive event I could point to and say, "This is when she began betraying me." It had been happening right in front of me, slipping through the cracks of our daily life. But if I had to guess, it was around the time she started working with him. His name was James. I only knew him as a name Emma mentioned occasionally, a colleague, someone she collaborated with on big projects. He was successful, well-spoken, a few years younger than her. At first, I never thought much of it. She worked in marketing, and teamwork was essential. She often spoke about coworkers, her boss, her clients. James was just another name in a sea of faces I had never met. But then his name came up more often. Too often. "He's a genius when it comes to strategy," she once said, scrolling through emails late at night. "We make such a great team." I remember smiling, nodding, not realizing what was happening. She started staying late more frequently. Then there were the weekend trips, conferences, training events, business meetings in other cities. She would come back energized, glowing in a way I hadn't seen in years. At the time, I thought she was just excited about her career. I was happy for her. Proud, even. Now I know better. The affair didn't begin with a single moment of weakness. It wasn't a one-time mistake, a lapse in judgment. It was intentional. It was cultivated over time, slowly, deliberately. It started with late-night conversations in the office, private jokes, lingering glances. Then, A touch on the arm, a stolen moment in an empty hallway. The first time they kissed, I was probably at home, cooking dinner for our kids, thinking about how much I loved my wife. She came home that night and kissed me on the cheek, like nothing had changed. But everything had. For 10 years she lived 2 lives. One with me, the devoted wife, the caring mother, the professional woman balancing work and home. And another with him, passionate, reckless, free. I don't know where they met when it wasn't business trips. Maybe cheap motels, maybe his apartment, maybe the back seat of his car. I don't know, and I don't want to. What I do know is that every time she told me she was out with friends, every time she said she was working late, she was with him. She smiled at me across the dinner table after spending the afternoon in his arms. She kissed our children goodnight after waking up in his bed. And I never knew. Not yet. Looking back, I wonder how she managed to lie so effortlessly, how she lived in 2 worlds without slipping, without making mistakes that would expose her. But Emma was careful, calculated, and I, like a fool, never saw the truth even when it was staring me in the face. I was blind to the details, the small things that didn't add up. The late-night showers when she came home late from work. The way she suddenly started keeping her phone face down on the table. The way she changed her passwords without telling me, claiming it was for security reasons. She started dressing differently. It was gradual at first, barely noticeable, but over time, it became obvious. New lingerie, expensive perfume, dresses that hugged her body just a little tighter. I chalked it up to self-care, something all women did when they wanted to feel confident. She had been going to the gym more often, eating healthier, talking about how she wanted to feel good in her own skin. I supported it. Why wouldn't I? She was my wife. I wanted her to feel beautiful. I just didn't realize she wasn't doing it for me. Our intimacy became less frequent, then almost non-existent. I tried not to take it personally. I convinced myself that it was stress, exhaustion, the natural decline of passion in a long marriage. But the way she looked at me had changed. The way she touched me, when she did at all, felt rehearsed, forced, like she was performing a role she no longer wanted to play. One evening, she was in the shower while her phone sat on the bedside table. I had never been the type to check her phone. I had never felt the need to. But something in me, something instinctual, told me to pick it up. It was locked, of course, but then, a message flashed across the screen. Can't stop thinking about today. I stared at the words, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I didn't recognize the number. There was no name saved. Just a message, glowing like a neon sign of my own stupidity. I put the phone down before she could catch me, walked out of the room, and sat in silence for what felt like hours. I could have confronted her that night. I could have demanded answers, forced her to admit the truth. But I didn't. A part of me wasn't ready to know. I wasn't ready to hear the confirmation of what my gut had already figured out. But whether I was ready or not, the truth was already there, woven into the fabric of our life, waiting for me to finally acknowledge it. Once doubt takes root, it spreads like a disease, consuming everything. I began to see my life differently, not as a collection of memories built with trust, but as a series of moments rewritten by suspicion. Every business trip, every late night at the office, every unexplained errand or vague excuse took on a new meaning. I became obsessed with details I had ignored for years, combing through them like pieces of a puzzle I had been too blind to assemble before. Emma continued to move through our life as if nothing had changed, but I knew better. She still smiled at me across the dinner table, still laughed at our children's stories, still played the role of the perfect wife. But now, I was watching her. Really watching her. And what I saw confirmed everything I had feared. She was more careful than I expected. There were no obvious red flags, no glaring mistakes, no perfume-scented shirts or hotel receipts stuffed carelessly in her purse. But there were patterns, inconsistencies too subtle for an untrained eye to notice. She checked her phone constantly, but always out of sight. She spent more time getting ready, putting effort into her appearance even on nights she wasn't going anywhere. She smiled at texts she never mentioned, and whenever I entered the room, she locked her screen with a flick of her fingers. I started testing her, dropping casual questions about her day, waiting to see if her answers aligned with what I already knew. Sometimes they did. Other times she hesitated, her mind racing for a response that wouldn't betray her. It was in those moments, those tiny fractions of a second before she spoke, that I saw the truth. The most painful part was the intimacy, what little was left of it. She had been pulling away for years, but now, I understood why. When I touched her, she tensed. When I kissed her, she responded mechanically, like it was an obligation rather than something she wanted. The warmth between us had been replaced by distance, and I had been too blind to notice how far apart we had drifted. One night, after she had fallen asleep, I sat in the darkened living room, staring at nothing. I thought about our life, our marriage, everything we had built together. I thought about the years I had spent believing we were solid, the times I had reassured myself that love changed, that passion ebbed and flowed, but trust remained. I thought about the family we had created, the children who still saw us as a united force. And then I thought about the message on her phone, the one I couldn't unsee, the proof that my wife belonged to someone else. I wasn't the man she thought about when she was alone. I wasn't the man who made her smile at her phone. I wasn't the man she wanted anymore. The realization settled over me like a weight I couldn't lift. Emma had been gone for a long time. I just hadn't noticed. Suspicion turned into certainty. I no longer needed proof. I knew what was happening. But knowing and accepting are two different things. My mind waged a war against itself, bouncing between the urge to confront her and the desperate desire to pretend it wasn't real. I had spent years trusting Emma, believing in her, defending her in my own mind against doubts I had been too naive to acknowledge. Now, that trust had rotted into something bitter, something I couldn't ignore no matter how much I wanted to. She didn't even try to hide it anymore, not in the ways that mattered. She still made excuses, still covered her tracks well enough that an average husband wouldn't have noticed. But I wasn't that man anymore. I saw the hesitation in her voice when she spoke about work, the way she avoided eye contact when she told me she was meeting friends. I noticed how she dressed up more on nights when she was supposedly staying late at the office. It was in the details. The barely there smirk when she checked her phone, the way she glanced at the door before leaving, as if she were already somewhere else in her mind. I followed her once. It wasn't something I had ever imagined myself doing, but the need for the truth overpowered my pride. She had told me she was going to dinner with her coworkers, a casual get-together. She left the house without looking back. 10 minutes later, I was in my car, trailing at a safe distance, my stomach in knots. She didn't go to a restaurant. She didn't even go to a public place. She parked outside an apartment complex, one I didn't recognize. I watched her sit in the car for a moment, checking her reflection in the mirror, fixing her lipstick. Then she stepped out and walked toward the entrance like she had done it 100 times before. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty in her steps. She belonged there. I didn't stay. I didn't need to see anything more. I turned the car around and drove home, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. That night, when she returned home, she kissed me on the cheek like she always did. She asked about my day. She smiled. She crawled into bed beside me, pretending nothing had changed. But everything had. I wasn't looking at my wife anymore. I was looking at a stranger. She had been cheating on me for 10 years. And I had spent 10 years being a fool. But I wouldn't be a fool much longer. The night I found the video, I wasn't looking for proof. I had already accepted the truth, had already seen enough to know exactly what kind of woman my wife had become. I thought I had made peace with it, or at least as much peace as a man can make when he realizes his marriage is a lie. But nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to see. Emma had left her laptop open on the dining table, something she rarely did. She was meticulous about her privacy, always locking her devices, always keeping her phone close. But that night she had been careless. Maybe she had grown too comfortable, too confident in her ability to deceive me. Maybe she thought I would never dare to invade her space. The screen was dim, waiting for a touch to bring it back to life. I don't know what made me do it. Call it instinct, call it a moment of weakness, call it years of suppressed doubt finally demanding an answer. My fingers moved before I could stop them, brushing the trackpad. The screen lit up. And there it was. A folder, sitting right there on her desktop, like it had been waiting for me. Labeled with nothing but a single letter, J. My chest tightened. My pulse hammered in my ears. For a moment, I hesitated, my mind screaming at me to walk away, to pretend I never saw it. But the years of doubt, the sleepless nights, the quiet, growing distance between us, they all led to this moment. I clicked. And the world as I knew it ended. The first video opened automatically. The image flickered to life, and there she was, my wife, the woman I had loved for more than 20 years, the mother of my children. But not as my wife. Not as the woman who came home to me every night, who kissed me goodbye in the mornings, who played the role of the perfect partner. She was with him. James. The man I had only known through passing mentions in casual conversation, the colleague, the business partner, the man she had been hiding in plain sight. I watched, frozen in place, as the screen showed me everything I had been too blind to see. The way she looked at him, the way she touched him, the way she smiled, real, raw, uninhibited. A version of her I hadn't seen in years. Maybe ever. My stomach twisted, my skin burned, my hands clenched into fists so tight I thought my nails might break the skin. But I couldn't look away. I was punishing myself, forcing myself to witness the reality of my own stupidity. The timestamps on the files went back 10 years. 10 years of deception, of stolen moments, of love she had given to another man while I sat at home, trusting her. 10 years of our life reduced to a series of lies, a performance she had perfected. By the time the video ended, something inside me had snapped. I wasn't sad. I wasn't heartbroken. I was done. Emma had spent a decade playing me for a fool. She thought she had won. She thought she had everything under control. She was about to learn just how wrong she was. Something inside me shifted the moment I closed that laptop. Whatever love, respect, or loyalty I had left for Emma died in that instant. There was no grieving, no sadness, no second-guessing. Just a cold, calculated resolve. She had spent 10 years making a fool out of me, living a double life right under my nose. But now, the game was over. And I wasn't going to let her walk away from this unscathed. I spent the next few days in silence, pretending nothing had changed. I smiled at her when she walked through the door, kissed her on the cheek like I always did. I played the role of the oblivious husband one last time. But in the background I was working. Emma had always been careful, but so was I. Our finances were mostly joint, but I handled the investments, the long-term planning, the security of our future. She never paid attention to those things. She trusted me, the same way I had once trusted her. Now, that trust was my weapon. I met with my lawyer, a longtime friend who didn't ask questions when I laid out what I wanted. I began the process of removing her from everything, our savings, our investments, the house. Every account she had access to was shifted out of her reach. Credit cards cancelled, passwords changed, assets locked down. I made sure that by the time she realized what was happening, it would already be too late. Then came the next step. The one that would shatter her perfect little world. Emma's career was everything to her. She had built her reputation on being a sharp, professional, trustworthy woman. But affairs leave behind a trail, and she had been careless. Work trips that weren't work trips. Expenses she had charged to her company card. Hotel stays, flights, dinners, all under the guise of business. And James? He wasn't just some random fling. He was a client. A major one. With everything I had gathered, I sent an anonymous email to her company's HR department. Documents attached. Screenshots. Receipts. Everything they needed to see exactly who Emma really was. I didn't even have to wait long for the fallout. Within 2 days, she was under investigation. Within a week, she was fired. She came home that evening shaken, her confident facade cracked for the first time in years. She tried to act like it was nothing, like she had everything under control, but I could see it, she was scared. For the first time, she was losing something she couldn't manipulate her way out of. And then, when she was at her lowest, I made my final move. I handed her the divorce papers. I will never forget the look on her face when she saw them. The way the color drained from her skin, the way her hands shook as she flipped through the pages. She opened her mouth to speak, to protest, to try to salvage what she could. But I wasn't interested in hearing a single word. I told her I knew everything. Every lie. Every affair. Every betrayal. I told her I had already spoken to the best divorce lawyer in the city, that everything had been filed, that there was nothing she could do. I told her that I had locked down our finances, that she would be leaving this marriage with exactly what she deserved, nothing. She tried to fight, of course. She screamed, she cried, she begged. She accused me of being cruel, of overreacting, of trying to ruin her life. But her words meant nothing to me. I had spent 10 years being played. Now it was my turn to walk away. And I did. Emma's world collapsed in a matter of weeks. Her career was gone, her finances drained, her reputation destroyed. The woman who once stood so confidently, believing she had everything under control, now faced a reality she never prepared for. I had spent years being the steady, dependable husband who always supported her, always made sure our family was secure. Now, that security was gone, and for the first time, she had to stand on her own. The divorce was swift. With the evidence I had, she had no leverage. Infidelity may not mean much in court when it comes to morality, but when it ties into financial misconduct and workplace violations, it becomes a powerful weapon. My lawyer ensured that I retained everything, our home, our savings, our investments. Emma fought, of course. She tried to argue that she had contributed just as much to our life, but the truth was undeniable. She had spent years funneling money into her own secret life, using our resources to fund her affair. When the numbers were laid out, she had nothing to stand on. She moved out with nothing but a suitcase, forced to crash at a friend's place because she had nowhere else to go. James, the man she had thrown away our marriage for, didn't come to her rescue. He didn't offer her a home, didn't fight for her. The moment she became a liability, he distanced himself. Whatever fantasy she had built in her mind about them being together, about their love surviving past the affair, shattered the moment she had nothing left to offer him. Our children were the final blow. I never had to tell them the truth. They figured it out on their own. They saw the changes in our home, the tension, the sudden absence of their mother. They asked questions, and while I didn't fill in every detail, I told them enough. I told them she had betrayed our family, had broken the vows that held us together. And they, without hesitation, chose me. Emma tried to reach out to them, tried to explain, to manipulate, to salvage what was left of her role as their mother. But they saw through it. They saw through her. They refused to meet with her, refused to respond to her messages. They wanted nothing to do with the woman who had torn apart the life they once knew. I should have felt victorious. I should have felt satisfaction, knowing that I had taken everything from her the way she had taken everything from me. But the truth is, all I felt was emptiness. I had spent so many years building a life with a woman I didn't really know. The person I had loved, trusted, sacrificed for, she never existed. The Emma I thought I had married was a fabrication, a carefully constructed mask worn by someone who never truly valued what we had. And now that she was gone, I was left to face the reality of it all. Revenge had been easy. Moving on was harder. In the months that followed, I learned that life doesn't simply return to normal after betrayal. There's no reset button, no clean break that erases the scars left behind. I had one, if you could call it that. Emma was gone, stripped of the life she had once controlled, and I had walked away with everything intact, at least on paper. But the truth is, nothing about me was intact. The house felt different. It was quiet in a way that wasn't peaceful. The air was heavy with the weight of memories I didn't want anymore. I could still see her in every room, still hear her voice, still feel the ghost of a life that had never been real. I thought about selling the house, getting rid of the last connection to her, but something held me back. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the belief that I shouldn't have to give up anything more than I already had. My children were my anchor. They were grown now, building lives of their own, but they made sure I was never alone. They called often, visited whenever they could, filling the space Emma had once occupied. I could see the anger they carried toward their mother, the disgust at what she had done. They never said her name, never asked about her. To them, she no longer existed. As for Emma, she tried to hold on to whatever scraps she had left. I heard from mutual acquaintances that she had attempted to rebuild, but nothing quite worked out the way she planned. The affair had cost her more than she realized. Without her career, without her reputation, without her family, she was adrift. James had discarded her the moment she became a liability, moving on with someone else, someone without the baggage of a decade-long affair. The life she had built on lies had crumbled, leaving her with nothing. She reached out once. A single message, months after the divorce was finalized. "I'm sorry. I wish things had been different." I never responded. Because things could have been different. She could have chosen honesty. She could have chosen me. She could have chosen the life we had built instead of throwing it away for fleeting moments of passion, for a decade of deception that ultimately left her with nothing. But she made her choice. And now, I had made mine. I moved forward. It wasn't easy, and there were nights when the weight of it all still sat heavy on my chest. But I refused to let her define me. I refused to let the betrayal become the only thing left of my life. I traveled, I reconnected with old friends, I focused on the things that had always mattered but had been buried under years of routine and responsibility. And one day, without even realizing when it happened, I woke up and felt light again. The anger was gone. The bitterness had faded. The past no longer had power over me. Emma had spent 10 years lying to me, but I would not spend another 10 years grieving her. She was nothing more than a chapter in my life, one that I had finally closed. And for the first time in years I was free.